Welcome to the National Book Festival. Welcome to the session with John Grisham. We are so thrilled to have you here, John. John, of course, is the author of The Guardians most recently, and Camino Wins, and has a new book coming out, I think, in November, John. And we are super pleased to have you. Your interview on the National Book Festival fiction stage, as well as the PBS special, is really marvelous, and I'm sure people will want to tune in. But here we have you in the flesh, so welcome back. And I've got a bunch of questions for you, John, waiting here. First of all, where are you? Are you in Charlotte?
I'm at home and on the farm outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. We live about 10 miles outside of town. We've been here for like 25 years, and this is where we live. And this is where I write. And yesterday, my son got married here on the farm, so we were up late last night. We have family, kids, grandkids, and the house is full of people, and we're having a ball. But had a great wedding yesterday, so we're very, very lucky.
Congratulations! That's marvelous. That's wonderful. Well, it's good of you to join us in the middle of all that, all those festivities. And I've got a bunch of questions here, so let me just dive in. DFP says, "Good day, Mr. Grisham. I am a huge fan of yours. What is the next book that you're working on, and will it be related to what's currently happening at our White House?"
Yes and no. The next book is called A Time for Mercy. It's done. I finished with it 2 months ago. It comes out October 13th. It's a sequel, sort of, to A Time to Kill. We're back in the courtroom in Clanton, Mississippi, with Jake Brigance, another big murder trial. Jake is sort of forced to defend a 16-year-old kid charged with killing a policeman. And because it's a dead cop in a small town, no lawyer wants to take the case. Jake doesn't want the case, but Judge Noose from A Time to Kill is still a judge, and he sort of forces Jake to represent the kid. And Jake reluctantly signs on. He didn't have a choice, really. And he gets embroiled in this really nasty, ugly murder trial. And the town of Clanton pretty much turns against Jake because he has a very unpopular client, which happens all the time in small towns. And so that's A Time for Mercy. It'll be out October the 13th.
Well, I can't wait to read it. That sounds wonderful. Denise Irvin asks you, what are you reading right now, or who are you reading right now?
Just finished James Lee Burke, The Perfect Cathedral. He's one of my favorites. Just finished Ian Rankin's latest book, halfway through Louise Penny's latest book. Read a lot of suspense, crime, mystery. Read a lot of nonfiction related to what I write about. Books about the criminal justice system, books about wrongful convictions, the death penalty. Stuff like, stuff I write about. So it's a 50-50 mix between fiction and nonfiction.
That's great. Katie Dennison asks, in your National Book Festival presentation, you mentioned that you plot out the story carefully before you start writing. Could you give more specific details about how that works? Do you draw out a timeline in the notebook or use some kind of writing software to lay it all out?
No software. It's very basic. Once I have the story in my mind, and that takes a long time, and usually, and often most stories don't work. I'll have a brilliant idea that I think will make a great book, and most of them eventually go away. Once I have a story I really like, I'll simply take on the computer chapter 1 and write a paragraph. What's going to happen in chapter 1? And then chapter 2 and chapter 3. And when I get to chapter 40, months later, or even years later, when I get to chapter 40, I'm at the end of the book. And that's a long, tedious process to sort of outline and plan the entire book. It's not as much fun as writing, the outlining and the planning and all that. But one of my favorite rules that I tell students and aspiring writers all the time is do not write the first scene before you know the last scene. And if you know the last scene, then it's very difficult to get lost along the way. You also can know what you need and what you don't need. There are often some subplots you don't need along the way. And so outlining is very tedious and takes a long time, but it's very crucial to the success of any suspense novel.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. I'm reminded of when John Irving said that he doesn't start a book until he's written the last sentence. I mean, he writes the last sentence first, which is so counterintuitive.
So glad you mentioned that. I met John a couple of years ago in Toronto. We did an authors thing one night and had a ball. First time I'd ever met him. And I asked him that question. I said, is it true that you write the last sentence before you write the first sentence? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I'm not that smart, but I know the last scene before I write the first scene. But he's very serious about it. And most writers will tell you they do not outline. I doubt that, because I think you have to know where you're going when you start, or you're going to get lost. And so, again, it's all a matter of planning and outlining. And and when you write suspense and mystery and thrillers, you have to drop off clues along the way. There are keys to the mystery, there are keys to the suspense, and you just better know where you're going when you start, or you can really get lost in every book. I still reach a point where I'm frightened. I'm scared. Is this book going to work? Is this story plausible? Is the ending going to be suspenseful enough? And every writer goes through that. And the fact that you know what the outcome is going to be, and you want the ending to be something that people don't really expect. I love the quirky ending. I don't want the reader to know how it's going to end. So again, it takes a lot of planning and a lot of thought.
Right. Well, your plots are quite intricate, so I could imagine that you do have to outline. Here's a question from Colleen Shogan, who, and it reminds me of the difference between your two new books that we're featuring at the festival, The Guardians and Camino Winds. She asks, as a writer, how do you approach writing a thriller versus a mystery? Is your approach and planning different?
No, the approach is the same. The approach is working out the story. With both thrillers and mysteries and suspense, you've got to hook the reader early on. I try to do it the first page sometimes. Certainly by the first chapter, you've got to have the reader fully engaged. And then the hard part is, once you have the opening, the hard part is sustaining the tension for 300 pages or 400 pages, leading up to an ending that is satisfactory but not expected. And that may sound easy, but it takes a lot of thought. But it's the same. I've written 3 books about sports, 2 football novels and a baseball novel. And I approached those books the same way. I said, what's the last scene going to be? How are we going to end this? So before I started. So when even the kids' books, I've written 7 books in the Theodore Boone series for young readers. And again, it's the same process. How is it going? Give me the last scene. What's the ending going to be? And that's how I start.
Your characters are really memorable. So this question from Melanie Christensen is kind of pertinent. What character do you feel is the most representative or reflective of yourself, John?
Jake in A Time to Kill, because when I wrote that book, I started writing in 1985. I was 30 years old. I'd never written before. And I was that small town lawyer in Mississippi, struggling, dreaming of the big trial, the big courtroom drama. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be a courtroom lawyer. And I was well on my way after a few years out of law school. And I had a pretty wife, still have a pretty wife, and same one. And she's having babies, and life was good. But life was, I was 30 years old, and it was a long time ago, but a lot of fun. But I put a lot of myself into Jake. It was very autobiographical. That's my courthouse. That's where I practiced every day. That's my small town. That's, it's Mississippi. It's the South. It's the culture and customs and the way people live and talk and act and think. And that's my home. That's where I should put all my fiction, I think, and I've been back several times. But again, Jake is very autobiographical.
Yeah, and you feel that when you read your books on Jake, because it feels very personal. So here's a related question from Julie Morgan, who asks, will Matt McConaughey reprise his role as Jake Brigance? Or Brigance, how do you pronounce it?
Brigance, Jake Brigance. No, Matthew, I owe a lot to Matthew because he was an unknown actor in 1995 when he was picked to play Jake in the movie, and he did such a wonderful job. It made his career. He said that many times, and we haven't talked about A Time for Mercy yet, but I know he has read the book and he'll probably be approached to do the movie. It's up to Matthew. If Matthew wants to do it, the movie will be made. I'll be thrilled with that. If he doesn't want to do it, a lot of actors, once they play a role, they want to move on and do something else. And I thoroughly understand that. So if he doesn't want to do it, then, Warner Brothers will try to find somebody else. But I'm not involved in any of that stuff. Not with The Time to Kill. But I would love for Matthew to come back and play Jake again.
Well, we will keep an eye on that on tenterhooks. And here's sort of a related question from Fran Featherston, who says, and how much input do you get to give for a movie made out of your books? Which movie do you think turned out best?
Well, first of all, I have not had a feature film made in 15 years. So the movie business has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. The studio system is broken and doesn't work. I mean, it's the typical Hollywood movie now is some cartoon, Spider-Man 10, where they spend $200 million to make a movie. They'll gross a couple of billion around the world. That's a good model if it works. There's really Hollywood makes so few smart adult dramas. You see what comes, and everybody's going to television, which is good because there's so much interest and talent in television now. But really good stuff, and we love to binge on TV shows, and like everybody else, so you can watch them, you can binge on them. So that's why TV is so popular. Right now, I probably have 5 or 6 different deals in the works for TV series, TV shows. I always have, a handful, but nothing gets filmed. Nothing's being filmed now anyway. So I don't know of any feature film that's going to be shot anytime soon. And I'm kind of beyond frustrated. I realized years ago, I don't make movies. I don't know how to make movies. I don't want to make movies. That's another world. All I can control is the fiction and what I write. And I spend my time trying to write, really good stories. If I get lucky and they make a film, great. You ask about control. I don't want control. I don't want to get near the process. It's a different world. What I normally do though is reserve the right to approve the director. We try to deal with people we know. And in Matthew's case with Time to Kill, I have the right to veto the top 2 or 3 characters, and I've only done it once, and that was with A Time to Kill. So I don't want to get involved in the process. The more control I could negotiate up front in a movie deal, kind of sucks me into the movie making process, and I don't want to do that. You ask about which is the most, I guess the most closest adaptation would be the Rainmaker with a very young Matt Damon.
Right.
Francis Ford Coppola did the movie. He has great respect for writers, and he wanted me on the set all the time to drink cappuccino with him. And so we had a lot of fun in Memphis drinking a lot of cappuccino and watching him film The Rainmaker. And The Rainmaker was just lifted from the book. And sometimes a couple of things happen with the movie. When I watch one of the movies, I'll hear some dialogue and I'll think, okay, I remember writing that many years ago. I remember where I got the idea for that one line or whatever. And then in every movie so far, and I've had like 10 of them, I'll hear some great dialogue or a plot twist that didn't come from the book. And I'll say, I wish I'd thought of that. That's brilliant. So, but yeah, I'd love for every book to be adapted into a great. We all love great films. I'd love to see all my stuff adapted to great movies. So we constantly, we're trying to sell or negotiating. Not me, but other people. We're trying to sell the film rights and make good TV shows and good movies.
Yeah. Well, it's so true that the story in your mind as you read it is always so different from what you see on a screen, and generally because it's collapsed so much on a screen. I mean, you can't get as rich detail and as long a narrative as on the screen as you can in the book. So, yeah, it's a different beast.
With a novel, we have no restrictions. A writer has no restrictions. I laugh at some of these guys who write, 1,000-page novels because I don't want to read I'm too lazy to read 1,000-page, brick. But most writers don't do that because I think that's too thick. But nobody tells us how long to make a book. But a movie has got to be 2 hours,
right?
Give or take a little bit. Got to have 2 hours, and that's 120 pages of screenplay,
right.
Which is about a fourth of a novel.
Right.
And so it's very. I've tried writing screenplays. I've written a few. I'm not going to do it again, but it's a different set of muscles, and I just don't want to go there. But you're constantly saying, okay, what can I cut? What subplot do I not need in the novel? You're constantly cutting and cutting to get it down to 2 hours. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, yeah. So John, now we want to get to the law because you're so passionate about the law. You're so passionate about justice and injustice, and there are a bunch of questions here that I want to maybe bundle if I can. Jay Taylor asks you, when you change careers from law to writing, was it one event or a series of frustrations that led you out of law? If so, what were those frustrations? And do you feel you can perhaps address them better as a writer than as a lawyer? And then Peter Boynton sort of tags on to that by saying, have you ever thought about returning to the practice of law?
No, I'll answer that one first. I'm not going back to the law office. I'm not going back to the courtroom. I only practiced law for 10 years. And about halfway through that career, I started writing. And I didn't know where that career was going to go. It was a secret little hobby I was doing that no one knew about but my wife. And when I started writing A Time to Kill and wrote The Firm, I was still a lawyer. There was a lot of frustration involved with being a small town practitioner anywhere in America because there's so many of them. And the competition is pretty fierce, and it's hard to make a decent living. Most small town lawyers that I know are honest, hardworking people who don't make a whole lot of money, and that's what I was facing when I was, in the trenches. And then I got the bug, the urge to write full time, and that became a dream. Just the pure independent freedom of being able to write every day for a living, sell books. And once that dream kind of took over, I really became disenchanted with the law and with politics and my other careers, and I just dreamed of being a full-time writer. That dream came true overnight. When A Time to Kill was published in '89, they printed 5,000 hardback copies, and the book was a flop. It didn't sell. And I was sort of down about that. But again, it was a secret hobby. I had a real job being a lawyer. And I told my wife, I said, look, I'm going to write one more book. And if the second book flops too, forget this secret hobby. I'm just going to be a lawyer. And The Firm was the second book. And when it came out, or when it sold in 1990, things changed dramatically overnight. I mean, I could literally walk out of the office and never look back. And that's what I did. I just said, okay, my dream has come true. I can write full time. I'm leaving the law. I'm leaving the politics. I'm going to pursue writing. And the first few years, I worked real hard to get The Firm out, the Pelican Brief, the Client, to get the first 4 or 5 books out. So I would have a cushion because I really did not want to go back to the law office. And I got lucky. The movies were a huge factor back in 1993, 94, 95 4 movies came out in that span of time, big famous movies we talked about, and they're still on television somewhere tonight. And they sold a zillion books, and they had a huge impact on the career. And I never looked back. I would never voluntarily go back into a courtroom. What you have to realize as a lawyer, a trial lawyer, trial work is extremely stressful. And I paint a very good picture of this in A Time for Mercy. When you see what Jake's going through when he prepares for trial, it's very stressful. And you've got to do it like anything else. You got to do it every day or all the time. You got to be in the courtroom, every week, every month, trying cases. And to lay out for 20 years and walk back in would be suicide. I wouldn't dare think about doing that.
Yeah. I'm with you. Don't do it. Don't do it. So here's what Erica Parker wants to know, because you refer to the firm. After the success of the firm, in what ways did your writing process change? Did you feel the pressure to top the success of this book with each subsequent book?
I've never felt the pressure to top the success of prior books. The pressure is all self-imposed by thinking, I want this book to be the best book I've ever written. I'm not coasting on what I've written before. I really want the next book to be the best book. And my wife, Renee, has always read every book first, and she often reads chapter by chapter when we get close to the end. And she's critical in a good way. But she read A Time for Mercy back in the spring when I was wrapping it up, and she said this is one of the best ones, if not the best. And that meant a lot because she, again, so I think Mercy is going to be one of the better books. With the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of maturity, I can look back and look at the shelf and I'll see a book and I'll say, that was probably not a great effort. It was the best effort I had at that time, 15, 18, 20 years ago. And then I'll see another book, another one of mine, and I'll say, that book was special. It was fun to write. I still love the story. So, but once you get into the routine, it's a career. I write every day. I publish a book every year, sometimes 2 books a year. And I'm always looking for another story, something. And I write about the lawyers, law firms, courts, trials, appeals, cases, stuff like that. And as Americans, we have this huge appetite for books about lawyers and the law, and the material is just endless. I mean, I have a whole list of books I want to write.
Well, you keep people reading for sure, John, and and it's a wonderful thing. I think you've done more for literacy in many ways, which makes me go to Emily Kennard's question, who asks you, I know you're a fierce literacy advocate. What do you think is most important thing we can do right now to improve literacy rates and interest in reading in America?
How do you improve literacy? Wow. I think the pandemic has been good for literacy.
Yeah,
are reading more, and books are selling very well. That's one factor, but we hope that the pandemic does not become an annual occurrence to encourage people to. Yeah, it goes back to education. The more we can improve education, and my daughter's a school teacher in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she's been teaching for about 10 years. She quit a few years ago to have kids and all that, but she stressed reading. She made reading fun for her kids, and she's the reason I began writing the kids series, because she wanted me to write suspense for kids. But I know publishers are terrified of the next generation of readers, of kids today, because of all the other distractions and diversions, video games and nonstop streaming and all the stuff on cable. And, kids are not reading as much as they were a few years ago. And that's a huge concern for those of us who write and publish. But again, I don't know how you turn that around, because we're not going to ditch the cell phones and iPads and cable TV and internet. So I'm not sure I can answer that question. How do you promote literacy? I don't know.
Yeah, well, you're sort of a one man stand against illiteracy, John. So we'll let you, sit back and not have to answer that question thoroughly for us. But here's something that I would like to close with, because we're getting very near the end time. But you're so passionate about wrongful convictions, and you've been such a champion of getting people justice who have been wrongfully convicted, especially death row situations. So, is there a message that you have for us? Is what's going on in that world right now? What should we be doing better? What can we do as citizens of this country to make it better?
We were seeing some progress in the area of criminal justice reform before 2016. The Democrats want to reform a lot of laws and make some serious changes to make the laws more fair. And from the other side, the Republicans, a lot of them feel the same way. The Republicans are also tired of paying for 2.5 million people in prison and an aging prison population that's about to bankrupt many of our states. We spend, so much money on prisons and drug courts, and we have the mass incarceration in this country is extremely expensive. And so those two sides were coming to the middle. We were excited about some pretty serious criminal justice reform. And then the new administration came in, and Jeff Sessions became AG. He has no desire to reform anything. And he killed, he just overnight killed our efforts to pass some meaningful criminal justice reform. So, what can the average person do? Obviously, you got to vote, but you have to lobby and get involved with criminal justice reform. And there are 1,000 great organizations you can find online. The Innocence Project is I've been on the board now for 15 years, and we work to free innocent people by DNA testing. And most people don't believe that there are thousands of people in prison. There are tens of thousands there, and some are on death row. And I've met some of them. And once you meet them, and then once you meet the exonerees, once you meet these guys who've spent 30 years for somebody else's crime, it's really hard to forget that stuff. I still lose sleep over it. And I communicate with guys in prison who are innocent. I can't get them out. We're trying. It's almost impossible to get them out. And so it's very frustrating. And that's the kind of stuff that I think about all the time, and I want to change. I want to work. I want to write. I want to do something to help bring about the end to wrongful convictions and mass incarceration and the death penalty. And so that still keeps me awake at night, and that's a good thing.
Well, thank you for that. It's such an important subject, and you've been really heroic in working those fields, John. We would love to hold on to you forever. We know you have a family gathering there to get back to, and we are out of time. Thank you so much, John Grisham, for sharing your time so generously. We've been speaking with John Grisham, whose latest books are The Guardians and Camino Winds. We recommend them highly. We hope you will watch his presentation on the festival site at the fiction stage at loc.gov/bookfest.